I'm 94 years old. I've played tough guys my entire career. Men who don't cry, who don't show weakness, who face down evil without flinching. That persona wasn't entirely acting. For most of my life, I prided myself on emotional control, on being the strong, silent type who could handle anything without breaking down. So when I tell you that I spent an entire night weeping after encountering Jesus twice in the span of a few hours, you need to understand how unprecedented that was for me. This happened 6 weeks ago. I'm sharing it now because I've needed time to process what occurred, to test whether it was genuine or just the imaginings of an old man's mind, to understand what I'm supposed to do with what Jesus told me. I've concluded that staying silent would be wrong, that what happened wasn't just for me, that the words that broke me open are meant to be shared, even though telling this story makes me more vulnerable than I've been in decades. Before I describe what happened, I need you to understand my resistance to emotional display. I grew up in an era where men didn't cry, where showing emotion was considered weakness. I built a career playing characters who embodied that stoicism. I directed films exploring themes of masculinity, violence, redemption, always from a controlled emotional distance. Even after coming to faith, I maintained that emotional reserve. I could acknowledge spiritual truths intellectually without allowing them to touch me at the deepest emotional level. That protective armor shattered in one night. Jesus didn't just speak to my mind or my spirit. He went straight to the core of my being, to places I'd been guarding my entire life, and what he said there broke me completely. Not destructively, but redemptively, the kind of breaking that's necessary before genuine rebuilding can happen. It started around 11 p.m. I was in bed, not quite asleep, but drifting in that twilight state between waking and sleeping. I'd been praying earlier, nothing unusual, just my normal evening conversation with God, thanking Him for the day, confessing where I'd failed, asking for wisdom and strength for whatever comes next. I wasn't seeking a vision or expecting anything extraordinary. That's important to establish because I don't chase spiritual experiences. I'm skeptical of people who constantly claim God spoke to them. So when Jesus appeared, it wasn't something I was angling for or manufacturing in my imagination. The presence came first, before any visual manifestation. The room, my bedroom where I've slept for years, suddenly felt different. The atmosphere changed in a way I can't adequately describe. It was like the air became thicker, charged with something beyond physical properties. And with that atmospheric shift came an awareness of presence of someone else there, who wasn't physically there but was more real than physical presence. Then I saw him, not with my physical eyes exactly. My eyes were closed, but I was seeing him more clearly than I see physical objects with my eyes open. He was standing at the foot of my bed, and the first thing that struck me was the intensity of his gaze. Eyes that saw everything, every pretense, every hidden thing, every defended place, but without condemnation. Just complete penetrating awareness combined with infinite love. I should have been terrified. Everything in me knew this wasn't normal reality, that something beyond my categories of experience was happening. But fear couldn't take root because the love was so overwhelming. Not sentimental love, not the warm, fuzzy feeling we usually associate with that word, but something fierce and pure and absolutely committed to my good regardless of cost. He didn't speak immediately. He just looked at me, and in that gaze I felt seen in a way I'd never been seen before. All the walls I'd built, all the emotional armor, all the carefully constructed persona, none of it blocked his sight. He saw the real me beneath all the layers, and he loved what he saw. Not because I was lovable, but because he's love itself. When he finally spoke, the words came not as audible sound, but as direct communication that bypassed language. I'm going to translate it into English, but what I received was meaning that transcended words. Clint, you've spent your whole life being strong. Let me show you what I think about your strength. Then he showed me my life from his perspective, not chronologically, but thematically. Every moment when I'd relied on my own strength, when I'd refused help because I needed to handle things myself, when I'd maintained emotional control at the cost of genuine connection, when I'd protected myself behind walls that kept out pain but also kept out love. I saw my marriages, how my emotional unavailability had damaged women who loved me. I saw my children, how my distance had left wounds even as I provided materially. I saw friendships that could have gone deeper if I'd been willing to be vulnerable. I saw professional relationships where I'd maintained authority through emotional distance. None of it was presented with condemnation. Jesus wasn't accusing me or listing my failures. He was showing me with infinite gentleness how the strength I'd prided myself on was actually a prison I'd built to protect myself from pain. And that prison hadn't just kept out pain, it had kept out the deep connection, the genuine intimacy, the full experience of love that he'd always wanted for me. As I saw this, something in me started to crack. The tears started then, not dramatically but steadily. I was seeing my life differently than I'd ever seen it, understanding that what I'd considered virtue, my self-reliance and emotional control, had actually been a barrier to what matters most. Then Jesus said something that cut even deeper. The strength I value isn't the strength to stand alone. It's the strength to admit you need me, to be vulnerable, to let yourself be loved. That's the kind of strength that changes the world. He showed me examples from Scripture. Peter weeping after his denial, being restored to intimate relationship with Jesus. Paul's weakness becoming the place where Christ's power was perfected. David's brutally honest psalms, pouring out every emotion without pretense. John laying his head on Jesus' chest at the Last Supper, unashamed of intimacy and dependence. The pattern was clear. The people Jesus used most powerfully weren't those who maintained emotional control and self-reliance. They were those who brought their whole selves to him, including their weakness, fear, pain, and need. Then Jesus asked me a question that I'm still wrestling with. What would your life have looked like if you'd learned this 60 years ago? That question destroyed me. I saw glimpses of what could have been, marriages that might have survived if I'd been emotionally available, deeper relationships with my children, a career used more intentionally for kingdom purposes instead of just artistic and commercial success, a life lived from a place of secure love rather than defended strength. I'm not saying my life has been wasted. God redeems and uses everything when we surrender it to him. But I was seeing the cost of my emotional self-protection, and it was far higher than I'd realized. The tears were flowing steadily now, not dramatic sobbing, just a constant stream of grief for what was lost, gratitude for being seen and loved anyway, and something like relief that the pretense could finally end. Then Jesus did something I didn't expect. He reached out and touched my chest, right over my heart, and when he did, I felt something break. Not physically, but spiritually and emotionally. It was like he reached into the core of my being and shattered the protective shell I'd built around my heart. The pain was intense but not destructive. It was the pain of ice thawing, of muscles long cramped finally relaxing, of wounds that had been sealed shut being opened so they could actually heal. I gasped, and the tears intensified. Jesus spoke one more time in this first encounter. I'm not done with you yet. Rest now, but I'll be back before morning. There's more you need to hear. Then the presence lifted, not abruptly but gradually, like dawn fading into day. The atmosphere in my room returned to normal, but I wasn't normal. I was shaking, weeping, feeling more emotionally raw than I'd felt in decades. Please tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your location. What I'm sharing is deeply personal, and I need to know I'm not just speaking into the void. If this testimony is reaching you, if it's touching something in your own experience, let me know. I didn't sleep after that first encounter. I couldn't. The emotional opening that had happened was too significant, too disorienting. I lay there in the dark, letting the tears flow, praying, processing, waiting for whatever Jesus had said was coming. Around 4 a.m., he came again. This time there was no gradual atmospheric shift. One moment I was alone with my thoughts. The next moment he was there, that same overwhelming presence, that same penetrating love. But this encounter was different from the first. In the first encounter, he dealt with my past, with the patterns of self-protection that had shaped my life. In the second encounter, he showed me the future. Not my personal future exactly, though elements of that were included, but the larger story I'm part of, the role I still have to play, the reason he was breaking me open at 94 years old. He started by showing me the state of masculinity in contemporary culture. I saw men who'd embraced the emotional vulnerability culture now celebrates but had lost any sense of strength or courage. I saw men who'd maintained the old model of stoic self-reliance but were imprisoned by it, just like I'd been. I saw boys growing up without any clear model of what healthy masculinity looks like. I saw the church's confusion about this. Feminized Christianity that asks men to be soft without being strong. Hypermasculine Christianity that celebrates strength without vulnerability, neither reflecting the fullness of what Jesus modeled, who was both tender and fierce, both emotionally available and unbendingly courageous. Then Jesus spoke, and these words are what broke me most completely, what had me weeping for the rest of the night. Clint, I'm breaking you open at the end of your life, because I need you to model something for men who don't know how to be both strong and tender. Your whole career has been about strength without vulnerability. Now I need you to show them vulnerability without losing strength. Men need to see that it's possible to be emotionally open, to weep, to admit need and weakness without becoming weak. The weight of that assignment crushed me. How was I supposed to do this? I'm 94 years old, near the end of my life. I've spent 9 decades building a persona that's the opposite of vulnerability. The world knows me as the squinting tough guy who doesn't need anyone. And now Jesus is asking me to publicly dismantle that image and model something completely different. I started to protest, to explain all the reasons why this was impossible, why he should choose someone else. But before I could articulate the objections, he showed me something that silenced me. He showed me men, thousands of them, who were trapped exactly like I'd been. Men who'd absorbed the message that real men don't cry, don't show weakness, don't need help. Men who were dying emotionally and spiritually because of that prison. Men who'd dismissed Christianity as weak precisely because they'd never seen it modeled by someone they recognized as genuinely strong. I saw their pain, their isolation, their desperate need for permission to be fully human instead of just performing masculinity. And I understood that my testimony, my willingness to publicly admit my emotional imprisonment and my need for Christ, could reach some of these men in ways that conventional ministry never could. That's when Jesus said the words that had me weeping uncontrollably for hours. I gave you strength and a public platform, not so you could build monuments to yourself, but so that at the end you could use both to point others to me. Your breakdown is your most important work. Your tears are your most powerful testimony. Your admission of need is your greatest gift to the men who've admired your strength. I completely broke down. The sobbing that had been controlled up to that point became uncontrollable. I was weeping for my own wasted years, for the men I could have helped if I'd learned this earlier, for the beauty of being seen and loved and given assignment even at 94, for the terrifying vulnerability of what he was asking me to do. But I was also weeping with something like joy, because being seen fully and loved completely, being given meaningful assignment even at the end, being useful for something that matters eternally, that's what every human heart longs for. And Jesus was offering it to me despite all my failures and all my defended independence. Then he showed me something else, something about the nature of his own incarnation and crucifixion. He showed me that his willingness to become vulnerable, to suffer, to cry out in pain and abandonment from the cross, that wasn't weakness disguised as strength. It was the ultimate expression of strength, the courage to be completely vulnerable because the mission mattered more than self-protection. That's what I'm asking you to model, he said. Not weakness, strength that's secure enough to be vulnerable, the kind of strength that can admit need without being diminished by it. I saw it clearly then. the false choice we've constructed between strength and vulnerability, between courage and emotional openness, between masculine power and tender sensitivity. Jesus embodied all of it simultaneously. He was fierce enough to overturn tables and tender enough to weep. He was courageous enough to face the cross and vulnerable enough to cry out in anguish. He was strong enough to carry the weight of human sin and open enough to express the full range of human emotion. That's the model. That's what healthy masculinity looks like. Not the stoic cowboy I'd played in films. Not the emotionally open but directionless softness that contemporary culture celebrates. Both, and strong and vulnerable, courageous and emotionally honest, fierce in mission and tender in relationship. Before Jesus left that second time, he told me something practical about how to walk out what he was showing me. Start by telling this story. Tell them about tonight, about how I came to you twice and broke you open. Tell them about the tears, about the years of emotional prison, about the assignment I'm giving you now. Don't perform it. Don't try to make it impressive. Just tell the truth about what happened. The men who need to hear it will recognize their own story in yours. Then he was gone and I was alone with my tears and the overwhelming sense that my life had just been reoriented around a new center. Everything before this night was preparation, even the things that felt like failure or waste. Everything after this night is about faithful obedience to the assignment he'd given me, regardless of how it affects my reputation or legacy. I wept until dawn, until the tears physically exhausted themselves. Not with grief anymore, though that was part of it. More with the overwhelming emotional release of letting down defenses I'd maintained for 90 years. It was like being emotionally reborn, learning how to feel without the constant filter of control and self-protection. I wept for my marriages, for the women I'd loved but kept at emotional distance. I wept for my children, for the father I could have been if I'd learned emotional availability earlier. I wept for myself, for the decades lived in emotional prison. I wept with gratitude for being seen and loved and given purpose even now. But I also wept with something like fear. What Jesus was asking felt impossible. How do you dismantle a public persona built over 70 years? How do you admit vulnerability when the world knows you as unbreakable? How do you model emotional openness at 94 when you've spent your whole life modeling the opposite? And yet, beneath the fear was something stronger, a sense of rightness, of finally aligning with who I was created to be, rather than who I'd constructed myself to be. A recognition that being used for kingdom purposes, even in terrifying vulnerability, is better than maintaining a defended reputation. The sun rose on a different man than had gone to bed the night before, not fundamentally different in identity. I'm still Clint Eastwood, but different in orientation. The armor was gone. The emotional self-protection had been shattered. I was more vulnerable than I'd been since childhood, but also more genuinely strong, because the strength wasn't coming from self-reliance anymore. Since that night, I've been learning to walk out what Jesus showed me. It's not easy. 90 years of habit don't disappear overnight. I still default to emotional control. I still feel the urge to protect myself behind walls. But now I recognize what I'm doing, and I have the choice to respond differently. I'm learning to cry, not just in private encounters with Jesus, but in everyday life. I'm learning to express emotion without shame. I'm learning to admit need, to ask for help, to let people see my weakness without trying to immediately cover it with strength. This testimony is part of that obedience. Telling you about the tears, about the breaking, about the emotional prison I lived in for decades. This is terrifying. It goes against everything I've built my public identity around. But it's what Jesus asked me to do, and I've learned that obedience matters more than reputation. Here's what I want men to understand, particularly men who've built their identity around strength and self-reliance. That's not true strength. True strength is being secure enough in God's love that you can be vulnerable. True courage is admitting need without being diminished by it. True masculinity includes the full range of human emotion, expressed appropriately and honestly. Jesus wasn't emotionally constipated. He wept at Lazarus' tomb. He expressed anger at injustice. He was tender with children. He was fierce with oppressors. He felt the full weight of human emotion and expressed it without shame. That's the model we're called to follow. For women reading this, understand that the men in your life who seem emotionally unavailable probably aren't heartless. They're probably imprisoned by the same lies I believed. They need permission to be vulnerable, safety to admit weakness, and the assurance that emotional openness won't cost them respect. You can't force this, but you can create space for it. 6 weeks later, I'm still processing what happened that night. The emotional opening hasn't closed back up. The tears come more easily now. The armor hasn't rebuilt itself. I'm living in a more vulnerable place than I've ever inhabited, and it's both terrifying and liberating. I don't know how much time I have left. At 94, every day is a gift. But however many days remain, I know what they're for. Jesus made that clear. I'm supposed to model what it looks like to be both strong and vulnerable, to demonstrate that emotional openness doesn't diminish masculine strength, to give permission to men who need to see that it's possible. This is my most important work, not the films I've directed or the characters I've played. This testimony, this willingness to be publicly broken open so others can find freedom, this is what matters. It's terrifying, but it's also exactly right. If what I've shared resonates with you, if you're trapped in the same emotional prison I inhabited for 9 decades, please hear this. Jesus wants to break you open too. Not destructively, but redemptively. He wants to show you that real strength includes vulnerability, that true courage admits need, that genuine masculinity embraces the full range of human emotion. And if you want to continue following this journey, if you want to hear more about what God is teaching me in these final years, subscribe so you stay connected. Not because I have everything figured out, I clearly don't, but because we're in this together, learning to be fully human in the way Jesus modeled it. I saw Jesus twice in one night, and his words broke me completely. But being broken open by love is better than staying closed by self-protection. The tears I wept that night were the beginning of freedom, the start of finally becoming who I was created to be. And if my testimony helps even one man find that same freedom, the vulnerability of sharing it will have been worth it. Before I close, I need to ask something. If this testimony has touched you, if you see your own story somewhere in mine, if you're beginning to understand that maybe the emotional armor you've been carrying isn't strength after all, please don't just walk away from this moment. Subscribe to this channel so you can stay connected as I continue sharing what God is teaching me in these final years. I don't know how many more conversations like this I'll be able to have, but I want to make sure they reach the people who need to hear them. And please, leave a comment telling me where you are and what this stirred in you. Not because I need the validation, but because this message about vulnerability and true strength is too important for me to wonder if anyone is actually hearing it. Let me know if this resonates. Tell me if you've been trapped in the same emotional prison. Share if God is using this to break something open in you. We need each other in this journey toward becoming fully human the way Jesus modeled it.